Hello and welcome to chapter 25. Today we're going to be talking about the urinary system. The organs of the urinary system include the kidneys, the left and right kidneys, uh, blood supplies to the kidneys, blood coming from the descending aorta from the heart, branches off to deliver blood to the kidneys, and then blood exiting from the kidneys after it's been cleaned by the kidneys via the inferior vena cava. The kidneys filter toxins and waste products out of our blood. It enters a tube called the ureter. The ureter carries urine down to a collection in the bladder, and the bladder muscle keeps the bladder closed until it's time to urinate, when the urethra opens and urine can flow. There are various nervous system controls for this process. The functions of the urinary system, as I've said, are to filter blood, to remove waste products, to produce urine, which is a liquid form of waste, and to eliminate that from the body. One of the components of urine is a chemical derived from breakdown of proteins in our food called urea. This is what gives urine its distinctive smell. And one of the main activities of your urinary system is to maintain fluid homeostasis in the body. Let's talk about the anatomy and physiology of the kidney and the urinary system. There are, as I said, two kidneys that are quite high up in the abdominal cavity against the dorsal body wall. One is on each side of the spine. They are in the back of the peritoneal cavity, and the left kidney extends from T12 to L3, whilst the right kidney is slightly lower under the liver. The external anatomy of the kidneys, they look like these convex bean-shaped structures. They're about the size of your fist. And on top, they contain an adrenal gland. This produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, sometimes called adrenaline, sitting there on top of the gland. And these hormones are part of the regulatory system that regulates blood pressure. Within the kidney, the internal anatomy of the kidney, there are three main regions. There's an outer region here. It's the smooth red color. That is the cortex. There's a capsule, hard capsule on the outside. There's a cortex. And then there are these medullary sections, these little pyramidal structures. These are slightly darker in structure. And then at the bottom of each of these pyramidal medullary structures is the pelvis, which are these funnel-shaped tubes that lead via the renal pelvis to the ureter. This is where urine is going to be collected. So let's take a little closer look at some of the internal anatomic details. These triangular renal pyramids here, these renal pyramids, have a slightly striped appearance. They look like they're striped from top to bottom here in this direction. That's due to the bundles of urine collecting ducts. And we'll take a really close look at what those urine collecting ducts are doing here in a moment. The renal calyx is this sort of cup-shaped area just underneath the renal pyramid that collects urine from the base of the pyramids and delivers that urine into the pelvis, the renal pelvis, and ultimately the ureter. Okay, continuing through our anatomy here, the renal medulla contains these loops of Henle. So they're looking here at these medullary structures here. There's the cortex on the outside. Yeah, renal cortex on the outside, and then the renal medulla here on the inside. So let's take a closer look here at the renal medulla. It contains these long loops of Henle that come down. So there's some filtration goes on here, blood delivery, filtration goes on down here, and then these long loops of Henle, where a lot of the filtration, secretion, and absorption of compounds in our blood occurs. So now let's take a look at the function of a nephron.
It's a hot day, and you've just downed several glasses of water, one after the other. Behind the sudden urge that follows are two bean-shaped organs that work as fine-tuned internal sensors. They balance the amount of fluid in your body, detect waste in your blood, and know when to release the vitamins, minerals, and hormones you need to stay alive. Say hello to your kidneys. The main role of these organs is to dispose of waste products and to turn them into urine. The body's 8 liters of blood pass through the kidneys between 20 and 25 times each day, meaning that together, these organs filter about 180 liters every 24 hours. The ingredients in your blood are constantly changing as you ingest food and drink, which explains why the kidneys need to be on permanent duty. Blood enters each kidney through arteries that branch and branch until they form tiny vessels that entwine with special internal modules called nephrons. In each kidney, 1 million of these nephrons form a powerful array of filters and sensors that carefully sift through the blood. This is where we see just how refined and accurate this internal sensing system is. To filter the blood, each nephron uses 2 powerful pieces of equipment, a blob-like structure called a glomerulus, and a long stringy straw-like tubule. The glomerulus works like a sieve, allowing only certain ingredients, such as vitamins and minerals, to pass into the tubule. Then, this vessel's job is to detect whether any of those ingredients are needed in the body. If so, they're reabsorbed in amounts that the body needs so they can circulate in the blood again. But the blood doesn't only carry useful ingredients. It contains waste products too, and the nephrons have to figure out what to do with them. The tubules sense compounds the body doesn't need, like urea, left over from the breakdown of proteins, and redirects them as urine, out of the kidneys and through 2 long sewers called ureters. These tubes empty their contents into the bladder to be discharged, ridding your body of that waste once and for all. There's water in that urine too. If the kidney detects too much of it in your blood, for instance, when you've chugged several glasses at once, it sends the extra liquid to the bladder to be removed. On the other hand, low water levels in the blood prompt the kidney to release some back into the bloodstream, meaning that less water makes it into the urine. This is why urine appears yellower when you're less hydrated. By controlling water, your kidneys stabilize the body's fluid levels. But this fine balancing act isn't the kidney's only skill. These organs have the power to activate vitamin D to secrete a hormone called renin that raises blood pressure, and another hormone called erythropoietin, which increases red blood cell production. Without the kidneys, our bodily fluids would spiral out of control. Every time we ate, our blood would receive another load of unsifted ingredients. Soon, the buildup of waste would overload our systems and we'd expire. So each kidney not only keeps things running smoothly, it also keeps us alive. Lucky then that we have 2 of these magical beans.
Okay, so let's review. The kidney filters blood. It reabsorbs water if your body needs to reabsorb water. It also reabsorbs salt, reabsorbs glucose, any nutrients that you need, including vitamins and minerals, back into the bloodstream in the amounts that you need them. The kidneys regulate blood pressure by regulating the amount of fluid and the amount of salt in your blood. And that's all controlled by a system called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, the RAS system. Ultimately, the kidneys are responsible for excreting waste from protein metabolism. Most of that appears as urea in your urine, regulates blood pH, and has this endocrine function, again, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. The kidney also produces erythropoietin, which is responsible for the growth of red blood cells and making sure you have enough red blood cells, and it can produce active vitamin D. Okay, again, but between 20 and 25% of total blood volume passes through the kidneys every minute. So the kidneys are producing about 1 to 2 liters of urine every day. Um, the blood is entering the kidney through the renal artery here on top. The renal arteries branch into smaller and smaller arterioles that carry the blood to the filtering units, the glomerulus. And after the blood is filtered, it will enter the renal vein and return back to the circulatory system. Waste products are into the urine. The functional unit of the kidneys are these structures called nephrons. The nephrons are the filtering units. They filter waste products from the blood, and they are the ones that produce urine. Each kidney contains over 1 million nephrons. So let's take a quick look at the functional unit, these nephrons here. So this is just a diagram showing you sort of a one nephron expanded up into a very large scale. First of all, let's take a look there at the top of the nephron is a ball of capillaries. The structure here, the structure here. This is called the glomerular capsule and the glomerulus. So blood is being delivered from the arterioles into kidneys here, and this is where filtration starts. Then after that, the filtrate from the blood enters the proximal convoluted tubule here, then the loop of Henle down here, up to the distal convoluted tubule, and ultimately into the collecting duct of the ureter. Urine production involves three processes. The first is filtration in the glomerulus, then reabsorption of the chemicals that your body needs, and finally secretion into the renal tubule and ultimately the ureter and bladder. Let's take a look at these processes one by one. The first is glomerular filtration. Blood pressure. Blood is forced into these arterioles, into the glomerulus, and the glomerular capillaries pushes fluids from the high pressure that's going into these glomerular structures, pushes fluids through basically a sieve. And smaller solutes, anything that's smaller than a protein, basically gets filtered. And the filtrate enters the tubule here. Yeah. This is a non-selective and a passive process. So a lot of the solutes that your body requires and needs are lost into this filtrate. Because a lot of the chemicals that your body needs are lost into the filtrate, your body then starts to reabsorb the things that we need. That includes reabsorbing glucose, reabsorbing sodium, reabsorbing amino acids, reabsorbing any lost proteins, reabsorbing vitamins, reabsorbing lactate, reabsorbing some of the urea and some of the uric acid. So the filtrate from your blood only clears up some of the urea each time that it goes around. So it's basically an active process. It has to continually keep urea levels low in your blood. So yeah, useful substances, water, glucose, amino acids, and ions are transported from the filtrate and re-enter the blood. There's also regulation of pH by regulating the hydrogen ions and the bicarbonate in the blood. As we go down into the loops of Henle, there's a complicated process which helps regulate the osmolarity of our blood, and ultimately there's regulation of how much water we retain. Additional substances that we don't need that are not retained here from the proximal tubule are still in the filtrate here, and they are actively transported from the blood into the tubule, and they're going to travel down through these tubules, through the distal tubule here, and ultimately will become part of the urine. So what are we looking to secrete? The body is trying to get rid of chemicals like urea, uric acid, creatinine, and certain pharmaceutical drugs are secreted via the kidneys. And some irons are balanced by the kidneys. That would be sodium and potassium are balanced. So if you've got too much salt in your diet, then your kidneys will do the best that they can to remove as much of that sodium as possible and secrete it as waste. We're looking here after the passive transport. Here we're looking now at the loop of Henle. This is a sort of a close-up diagram of what's going on in the loop of Henle. This is the structure that dives deep down into the medulla. So this is these pyramidal structures. This is the loop of Henle coming down here. On the proximal side of the loop of Henle, there is passive transport of water out of the urine. This concentrates the filtrate, making it very salty. The ascending side here, there is active transport of ions, particularly sodium and chloride, to retain some of the sodium there. And this process is used to basically balance your blood osmolarity. So if you need to retain more water flows out on this proximal side. If you need to retain more sodium, then that occurs here on the distal side. This is passive transport, and there's active transport of sodium and chloride here. Okay, so now we know that the afferent arteriole is delivering blood to the glomerulus. That's regulated. Then the efferent arteriole is taking blood away, and the filtrate here from the glomerulus enters the Bowman's capsule, and compounds are reabsorbed from the filtrate back into the capillaries here, and some compounds exit back into the urine. Particular water goes back into the urine if necessary. And then the renal vein exits the kidneys. Let's take a closer look at this process of urine formation.
The kidneys filter blood plasma, removing metabolic wastes, toxins, and excrete them in urine. During this process, they also maintain constant volume and composition of the blood, or homeostasis. Blood enters the kidney via the renal artery, which divides into smaller arteries, then arterioles. The arterioles get into contact with functional units of the kidney called the nephrons. This is where blood filtration and urine formation take place. The filtered blood then passes through a series of veins and exits the kidney via the renal vein. The urine is collected in collecting ducts and leaves the kidney via the ureters. Each kidney contains over 1 million nephrons. A nephron consists of two major parts, a glomerular capsule, or Bowman's capsule, and a long renal tubule. Renal tubules of several nephrons connect to a common collecting duct. There are 3 steps in the formation of urine: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption and secretion, and water conservation. Blood enters the Bowman's capsule via the afferent arteriole, passes through a ball of capillaries called the glomerulus, then leaves via the efferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole is significantly larger than the efferent arteriole, creating a blood flow with a large inlet and small outlet. As a result, the blood hydrostatic pressure in these capillaries is much higher than usual. Hydrostatic and osmotic pressures drive water and solutes from blood plasma through a filtration membrane into the capsular space of the nephron. The filtration membrane acts like a sieve, allowing only small molecules to pass through. These include water, inorganic ions, glucose, amino acids, and various metabolic wastes such as urea and creatinine, and make up the glomerular filtrate. The amount of filtrate produced per minute is called glomerular filtration rate, GFR. GFR is kept at a stable value by several feedback mechanisms within the kidneys, known as renal autoregulation. GFR is also under sympathetic and hormonal control. GFR regulation is generally achieved by constriction or dilation of the afferent arteriole. which causes the glomerular blood pressure to fall or rise, respectively. In a healthy person, the total filtrate volume amounts to between 150 and 180 liters a day. However, only about 1% of this is excreted as urine. The remaining 99% is reabsorbed back to the blood as the filtrate flows through the long renal tubule. This is possible because the efferent arteriole, after exiting the Bowman's capsule, branches out to form a network of so-called peritubular capillaries, which surround the renal tubule. The first part of the tubule, the proximal convoluted tubule, reabsorbs about 2/3 of the filtrate. In this process, water and solutes are driven through the epithelial cells that line the tubule into the extracellular space. They are then taken up by the peritubular capillaries. Sodium reabsorption is most important as it creates osmotic pressure that drives water and electrical gradient that drives negatively charged ions. Sodium levels inside the epithelial cells are kept low thanks to the sodium-potassium pumps that constantly pump sodium ions out into the extracellular space. This creates a concentration gradient that favors sodium diffusion from tubular fluid into the cells. Sodium is absorbed by symport proteins that also bind glucose and some other solutes. Nearly all glucose and amino acids are reabsorbed at this stage. About half of nitrogenous wastes also reabsorb back into the bloodstream. The kidneys reduce the blood levels of metabolic wastes to a safe amount, but do not completely eliminate them. Some of the reabsorption also occurs by the paracellular route through tight junctions between epithelial cells. At the same time, tubular secretion, where additional wastes and other solutes leave the bloodstream to join the tubular fluid, also takes place. The processes of reabsorption and secretion continue in the nephron loop, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. These parts of the tubule also have some other important functions. The main function of the loop of Henle is to create and maintain an osmolarity gradient in the medulla that enables the collecting ducts to concentrate urine at a later stage. The ascending limb of the loop actively pumps sodium out, making the medulla salty. The descending limb is permeable to water, but much less to sodium. As the water exits the tubule by osmosis, the filtrate becomes more and more concentrated as it reaches the bottom. The ascending limb, on the other hand, is permeable to ions, but not water. As a result, the filtrate loses sodium as it goes up and becomes more diluted at the top of the loop. The medulla is in equilibrium with the loop and hence has the same salinity gradient, saltier at the bottom. Reabsorption and secretion in the distal convoluted tubule are under control of various hormones. This is how the kidneys respond to the body's needs and adjust the composition of urine accordingly. The collecting duct receives tubular fluid from several nephrons. The main function of the collecting duct is to concentrate urine and therefore conserve water. This is made possible by the osmolarity gradient generated by the loop of Henle. As it gets saltier deep in the medulla, the filtrate loses water as it flows down the collecting duct. The collecting duct is also under hormonal control, so it can adjust the amount of reabsorbed water according to the body's state of hydration. For example, when the body is dehydrated, more water is reabsorbed back to the blood, and the excreted urine is more concentrated.
Okay, so that's how urine is produced. Urine changes in color or has colors from clear through a very deep or dark yellow, sometimes almost brown. It's slightly acidic in pH, usually around pH 6. It should be clear or transparent, it should not be cloudy. And it has a specific gravity that's slightly higher than water. So if you look at the various colors of urine, a well-hydrated person should be in this range, a pale, slightly yellow color. Mildly dehydrated, the color starts to get more yellow, and then severely dehydrated, it turns into these very dark yellow colors and even to a brown color. Neuronal and hormonal circuits control kidney function and control water balance. And by controlling kidney function and water balance, ultimately control your blood pressure. Mammals can control the volume and the osmolarity of urine in response to salt intakes in food and in response to water availability. So there are two major control circuits that respond to different stimuli and together maintain our normal water and salt balance. The two main mechanisms are a hormone called antidiuretic hormone and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. First of all, let's take a look at antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is also called vasopressin. Antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin is released from the posterior pituitary and it will enter the bloodstream, travel to the kidneys, and bind to a receptor on the surface of cells of the collecting duct. After a signaling cascade, it results in the placement of water channels on the surface of the lumen of the collecting duct. What does that mean? That means that water goes from the urine and back into the body. So this is a cascade where aquaporin, this water transporting molecule, is placed in the membrane and the lining of the collection duct, which increases water recapture. What does that mean for your urine? Well, that means that your urine will become more concentrated. So your pituitary detects loss of water or increase in osmolarity in your blood. It releases antidiuretic hormone and tells your body to retain and keep as much water as possible. So you reabsorb water from your urine. The regulation of fluid retention by antidiuretic hormone makes the collecting duct more permeable to water. So let's take a look at this whole process. Let's say your blood osmolarity increases because you're working out hard and you're sweating profusely. What that will do is will change your blood osmolarity as the blood travels through the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will release antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone signals to the collecting duct to release aquaporin into the membranes to increase water reabsorption from the urine. As that happens, water is reabsorbed and normal blood osmolarity is maintained. At the same time, specific neurons in the hypothalamus generate thirst, so you will also drink water, and drinking water helps to maintain normal blood osmolarity. So the hypothalamus has two functions here. One is to tell you to drink more water, and the other is to reabsorb water from your urine. A really good rule of thumb is if you're thirsty, drink. Okay, so let's take a closer look at what's going on here in terms of active and passive transport. Blood is being filtered in the glomerulus. The proximal tubule is absorbing nutrients like glucose, amino acids, water bicarbonate, and secreting at the same time into the filtrate waste products like urea. The filtrate drops down through the descending loop of Henle. Water is absorbed. Salt concentration, salinity rises. Sodium is then secreted on the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. So this is a very salty environment out here. And then in the distal tubule, more absorption of salt, bicarbonate, potassium ions, and hydrogen ions to keep your pH balances occurring. And then finally in the collecting duct, if your body needs to absorb more water, more aquaporin is placed on the surface of the collecting ducts, and the water flows down that concentration gradient towards this high salt environment, and then you'll absorb that water and maintain blood volume. Let's take a look again at antidiuretic hormone function.
Hormones regulate water reabsorption by the nephron tubule in response to body fluid intake and loss. On a hot day, when you're sweaty and thirsty, blood solute concentration rises. In response, the brain signals the posterior pituitary to increase its output of the hormone ADH. ADH makes the walls of the collecting duct more permeable to water. Recall that the interstitial fluid surrounding the nephron tubule has a high solute concentration. ADH allows more water to leave the filtrate by osmosis and re-enter the blood. The body conserves water and concentrated urine is produced. When you have been drinking more water and not losing much fluid, the blood becomes more dilute. The brain responds by decreasing the secretion of ADH. The collecting duct becomes less permeable and less water is reabsorbed. The body produces dilute urine.
One of the effects of alcohol is that alcohol is a diuretic and it inhibits the release of antidiuretic hormone. The result is dehydration, and this can cause some of the symptoms that you might see in somebody suffering from a hangover. There is actually also a mutation in antidiuretic hormone production that causes severe dehydration and a total inability to regulate and retain water. This very rapidly results in diabetes due to the elevated sodium concentrations as hypernatremia, and along with high sodium concentrations are high glucose concentrations. So sodium and glucose reabsorption is regulated on a co-transporter. So if there's high sodium concentrations, there's going to be high glucose concentrations as well in your blood, and that causes this hyperglycemia. There are also some mutations in the aquaporin gene, which is the protein that antidiuretic hormone stimulates to help you retain more water. Okay, one of the ways that the kidneys are regulated are through the nervous system, and particularly the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system contains nerves that affect the juxtaglomerular cells. These are the cells that are right next to the glomerulus. This would be the glomerulus here. And the cells that are regulating the afferent, that'd be the entry of blood into the glomerulus. So one of the effects of stimulating your sympathetic nervous system and producing norepinephrine is to ultimately result in the reduction in the size of the afferent blood vessels, which increases blood pressure. So let's take a look at how the sympathetic nervous system and the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system are regulating blood pressure. So angiotensin is the molecule that is responsible for raising blood pressure by triggering vasoconstriction. Okay, and by triggering vasoconstriction, that decreases blood flow to the kidneys. Decreased blood flow to the kidneys results in elevated blood pressure. This reduced blood flow to the kidney also decreases filtration, and it stimulates the release of the hormone aldosterone. So this is renin, stimulates the production of angiotensin. Angiotensin stimulates the production of aldosterone. And this together, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system operates as part of a feedback loop that a circuit that regulates your blood pressure. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at what is going on here. The liver produces a molecule called angiotensin. It also produces ganinogen, and which is metabolized by kallikrein to bradykinin, and this is a molecule that causes vasodilation. Okay, but we want to concentrate here on this side of the pathway, where the liver produces angiotensinogen, and renin converts angiotensinogen It's an enzyme that converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is still an inactive molecule. It is converted by an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 binds to the angiotensin 2 receptor, the angiotensin receptor, which results in vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction results in aldosterone release. But you see, alongside of angiotensin 2 activation is sodium retention, it's pro-inflammatory, and it increases, ultimately, blood pressure. Okay, so let's take a look here at what's going on. You've got the system here in balance, normal blood pressure and volume. Now, if for some reason blood pressure or blood volume drops, for example, this could be from dehydration or maybe blood loss, then there are sensors in the juxtaglomerular region that detect this decrease. Okay, the juxtaglomerular apparatus here may sense a change in blood pressure. At that stage, the juxtaglomerular apparatus can release the enzyme renin. The enzyme renin converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. This is not an active molecule. It needs further conversion by an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE. ACE is a target for many of the drugs that regulate blood pressure and inhibit and decrease blood pressure. Okay, so angiotensin converting enzyme converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will talk to the adrenal glands to release aldosterone, and aldosterone can signal to the kidneys to retain sodium and water and thereby increase blood pressure back up. Okay, angiotensin 2 also constricts the arterioles that are delivering blood to the glomerulus. And by constricting blood entering the glomerulus, you decrease filtration rates and you increase blood pressure because there's less blood entering the kidneys. So common medications inhibit this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. The angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE, is the target for most of these common medications. ACE inhibitors that are available in the United States include things like benazepril, captopril, enalapril, and so on and so forth. Most of them have this pril name at the end of the inhibitor name. They're all slightly different chemicals, but they all have the same effect. They inhibit the enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme. ACE inhibitors are the fourth most prescribed drug in the US, and this lisinopril is one of the most prescribed drugs in the United States. Coordinating salt and regulating water balance. Aldosterone and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system both increase water absorption, but only the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system maintains the osmolarity by also stimulating absorption of sodium. There are other hormones that can regulate blood pressure. One of the more important ones is a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. This is a natriuretic peptide. Natrium is sodium, so this helps to secrete or increase the secretion of sodium. So this will act in an opposite manner of the angiotensin, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Atrial natriuretic peptide is released by the atria of the heart in response to increased blood volume and blood pressure. This is why exercise results in lower blood pressure. So lower blood pressure after exercise occurs because the heart atria are working hard and releasing atrial natriuretic peptide, which helps you lower blood pressure and by releasing extra sodium from the kidneys. This action is, lowering blood pressure and decreasing volume, and suppresses also at the same time the release of renin, because atrial natriuretic peptide also inhibits the release of renin, and so suppresses the entire renin, angiotensin, aldosterone pathway. So atrial natriuretic peptide, antidiuretic hormone, and the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system are a elaborate set of checks and balances that control blood osmolarity, that control sodium concentration or salt concentration in your blood, and keep that in a very narrow range, thereby controlling blood volume and ultimately controlling blood pressure. It's very important to keep blood pressure in a fairly narrow range, because if blood pressure gets too high, that will result in damage to blood vessels, and can result in strokes or heart attacks. And if blood pressure is too low, that can result in failure of delivery of oxygen and glucose to really important tissues, fainting, and so forth. Thirst plays an important role in regulating the amount of water that enters the system. Nutrition plays a really important part in how much sodium enters the system, how much salt enters the system. And for this reason, it's really important to drink when you're thirsty and to not eat too much salt to overpower this system in terms of driving too much salt entering your system. Researchers have really been focusing on identifying cellular and molecular pathways that also link the nervous system to behavioral responses like thirst. And we're coming to a pretty good understanding now of how the brain is regulating this entire process. Let's take one quick review of the function of atrial natriuretic peptide. This is the hormone that's released by the atria of the heart, and it's why one of the reasons why exercise lowers blood pressure.
Let's learn about atrial natriuretic peptide. Fluid volume and blood pressure are closely related. Changes in fluid volume cause changes in blood volume, which affects blood pressure. The heart secretes a hormone to help control blood pressure. This hormone is called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. ANP is secreted by the atria of the heart. ANP is secreted in response to an increase in blood volume. ANP targets the kidneys and causes a decrease in sodium reabsorption. More sodium exits the body. When sodium exits, more water follows by osmosis, and fluid volume decreases, causing subsequent decreases in blood volume and blood pressure. ANP affects blood vessels by causing vasodilation. This also works to lower blood pressure. ANP vasodilates the afferent arteriole, which brings blood into the glomerulus, thereby increasing the amount of filtrate produced by the kidneys. This causes more sodium and water excreted by the kidneys, which helps to lower blood pressure. Other effects of ANP include inhibiting the renin-angiotensin system, reducing aldosterone secretion by the adrenal cortex, and releasing free fatty acids from adipose tissue. We hope you've learned something about ANP, and see you next time.